today we got a good one. We are going to be addressing the discourse around harassment, Capcom's statement, and we're going to be touching on a little bit of how it not only applies to us, but it applies to the Japanese audience of Monster Hunter as well. We would like to shed some light on it, and by we, I've got Lutyrannus here. Extremely prolific, excellent Monster Hunter news extraordinaire.
I'm a little famous.
Yeah, he's a little famous. You want to give a little bit of your background, Luty?
Yeah, so I'm a guy. I don't really know what I do. Well, no, I'm a moderator at MH Old School, which are the private servers for the PlayStation 2 Monster Hunter games. I was just kind of a dude who just existed in the Monster Hunter community. A bunch of people followed me, and then now some people think I have some sort of position of authority, so I take it. Take what you can get, you know.
True.
Now I use it as my way to spread my propaganda and make sure that everyone in the Monster Hunter community has the correct opinions, which are my own.
True. And to also proselytize Monster Hunter Dose.
Yeah, exactly.
Now,
you understand me.
You helped to drop a bombshell on the Monster Hunter community as a whole. Multiple videos have been made off of this machine translation that you have brought to the table on Twitter. I've got it pulled up right now, but you were one of the first people on the scene whenever Capcom actually released their statement to their Japanese audience. And as we can see by all the videos that have been made so far, this has left quite an impression on the community. What do you think about all that?
Well, it's definitely fun every time I have seen a video on this pop up and they immediately pull up they pull up the thing and I'm like, oh hey, that's the screenshot I took when I just happened to be reading it. But yeah, no, I happened to be on Twitter exactly when Capcom posted this. And now originally they posted it on their Capcom account in Japanese. And they technically did not link it to Monster Hunter at all. So I was like, this sounds like it might have to do with Monster Hunter, but I didn't want to assume anything. So I was just like, I have a sneaking suspicion that this has to do with Monster Hunter. And then, especially because I've been reading a lot of Japanese reviews for the game. Well, I've been reading a lot of reviews in general, because I'm really interested in just the whole situation with this game in general. I find it really fascinating to, just kind of analyze what are people thinking about this game, and, why has it flared some, such powerful discourse, shall we say. And, the Japanese reviews, though, I've always noticed happen to be the most harsh and, personal of all the reviews. Most English reviews will be like, Capcom was hasty, they rushed the game out, it runs like Garbo. Stuff that's not necessarily wrong. But, the Japanese reviews will not leave it there. They will specifically mention, they won't say names, that's the one thing I'll give them, but they'll say, I think this is a problem when you have a certain director work on your game or a certain producer, and then they mention specific things about specific people and talk about their arrogance and how they don't understand. They didn't even play test their game and they don't know and it just was so much more personal. So the moment I read this, I was like, oh, maybe this situation is a lot worse than I thought.
Yeah. Well, that's most definitely interesting because there is that split fan base of the Western audience, and then you have the Japanese audience as well. And as native English speakers or people that mostly consume English content or Western content, we may have one side of the picture and one side of the discourse, whereas Japan might have their own divisive discourse that looks very differently. I know I read previously you were mentioning some of the things that you found interesting about the Japanese complaints were that while Monster Hunter fans in the West a lot of complaints were there's not enough friction, the difficulty's too easy. You mentioned that a lot of the Japanese fans found some of the friction unnecessary and grueling, having to rest and things like that, a whole different focal point of criticism.
Yeah, and that's why I think Capcom's in such an interesting situation, because they really have completely opposite poles that they have to balance. And like I'd say from the difficulty perspective, both Japan and most like Anglophone communities have been on the same feeling when it comes to just pure combat difficulty. I've seen a lot of Japanese reviews that complain about, you know, monsters dying too quickly, or there not being enough to grind for. They call it like end content. You know, and the performance, which has been easily in both sides. In fact, I won't even say performance. I'll say game stability, because like, you know, I think that for the most part, the problem people have with Wilds, or at least that has people kind of ravenous about Wilds, is not that like, oh, it runs at 50 frames per second instead of 60 or whatever on their rigs. For a lot of people, the game barely runs in general, you know? And that's by far been the number one thing. So later on, you know, they actually, the Monster Hunter Twitter account in Japan, well, the Monster Hunter Wilds Twitter account, because unlike the West, they actually have separate Twitter accounts for each game in Japan instead of just one Monster Hunter account that they just update for each game. They officially linked it. That was when, you know, the Monster Hunter account quote retweeted it and was like, "We've updated this, please read it." And that's when it was clear what this was about, you know.
Gotcha. Now there have been some, I would imagine it's on Japan's side as well, but there have been some people that have kind of taken this statement as a "don't insult our game or us or else we will sue."
Yeah.
You know, kind of a, we're
big Capcom.
Yeah, we're scared of your insults and we don't want anything, you know, bothering us. We can't take criticism. And of course, like the assumed violent acts or violent behavior and demands for special treatment, like anything like that. But it does seem like this is a very vague document of sorts. It is kind of weird too. So like we have a list of bullet points, and personal attacks and insults are in the same place as violent acts, violent behavior, visiting or staying at our premises without permission.
Yeah, they definitely wanted to cover their bases, so they have the wider the breadth you can act on when you feel like you need to. Definitely. Now, for the sake of nuance, instead of just scolding the community and only people that speak English, you know, like definitely don't go out of your way to harass developers and stuff. I think we can all agree that's like a very good trait, to not just go out of your way to harass developers. I think there's no debate on that. You know, definitely don't go out of your way to do it. And it you know, some of this stuff does exist on the Western side, on the English speaking side. There is like very harsh criticism. Death threats are not a new thing in the gaming industry. Especially on the Western front. You know, all sorts of other types of harassment, from racism to, you know, all these things exist in the Western audience. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like it doesn't exist. It definitely does. And the people that are actively operating on that front, definitely you quit it. But to kind of like talk about one detail a lot of people, you know, kind of ran with this machine translation, but there was never an English press statement. There was never anything addressed to the Western audience. It was specifically to Japan. Isn't that correct? Yeah, I mean, they never posted anything in English. They haven't acknowledged it. There's not been any like subtweets by the community managers. Sometimes the community managers will do that, like when everyone was talking about Legiacris supposedly having been planned for launch and then being canceled later. You know, one of the community managers, I don't remember which, but
I think it was
kind of subtweet. Yeah, I think you're right. He kind of subtweeted about it, where he was like clearly talking about people who think that, but not like, no, there's been nothing like that for this. It seems really like an issue specifically for Japan, and it's something that I've found very interesting, has been overlooked, because I think a lot of people, they just see this and they don't even think about the fact that it hasn't been posted in English, because I think they just see it through the translation I posted, and they usually see it out of the context of my tweet, because, you know, that tweet didn't blow up that much. It was more my other tweets about it that blew up. And so people see the image and they don't even know, that this isn't an actual English post. It's a translation of a Japanese one that I took when I was like, clicked on a link, and then my browser was like, hey, you want us to translate this for you? And I was like, sure, I don't know Japanese that well to read it on my own, so go ahead. And then, and then they run with it. And this is the kind of thing that happens a lot with these sorts of things. Like, we have a lot of times where people will speculate, like when a title update comes out, over how many monsters they're going to add based on like the specific wording used. Like, I don't know if you remember back in Sunbreak when everyone was like obsessing over the fact that they said several monsters.
Yeah.
And several means more than 7. When it's like, no, dude, this is a translation. Like, yeah, even in that case, sure, it wasn't a machine translation, but it's still a translation of a language that doesn't even have like plural for the most part. So it's like, you also saw a lot of people, like in the last Wilds update, fussing over, whether or not different announcements said monster or monsters, plural. When in most situations, you can't really glean much from that unless Capcom is like really strict about their translation and making sure there's nothing like that, which I imagine they aren't for a lot of these things that are going to get posted and then forgotten in a couple months once the update actually comes out.
Yeah.
Like, people need to be a little more, people need to know when they're reading a translation of something and when they're actually reading a thing that was written in English by an English speaker for English speaking people.
Yeah. And I think I don't think it's anything malicious, and I think you'd agree as well. It's nothing malicious. It's people are passionate and
people get excited.
Yeah, people are excited.
I get it. You see several monsters and you're like, oh sweet, there's gonna be 8 billion monsters they're gonna add in Sunbreak. Like, I get it, it's fun.
That, or they see a very good looking machine translation, if I may say. Yeah. And they run with it and they're like, damn, this sucks. Why are they getting harassed like that to the point where they need a statement? I can't necessarily fault any YouTuber for going out of their way to champion being a decent person.
Yeah, I mean, it's usually what they say is true. They'll talk about, this isn't what our community should be known for, and it's like, yeah, you're right, that's not what the community should be known for. But I think people are being a little harsh, and I don't think that's what our community is known for. I think that most of the time, people who play Monster Hunter have a good time talking with other people who play Monster Hunter. And obviously there's gonna be the extremists out there, who will not want to have discussions and stuff. But when you when you don't give those people the attention they want, I think we got a pretty good community here. Like, I've been in the Zelda community, in the Animal Crossing community, in the like a few different gaming communities. And the Monster Hunter one is by far the one where I've made the most friends and I've like wanted to spend the most amount of time, because I think people are just, for the most part, pretty chill.
That checks out. Shout out to my boys at the steakhouse. I've met some of the coolest gamers around through Monster Hunter. But continuing on, so basically all that to be said, that while indeed they addressed Japan, this could also apply to Western audience, English speakers. Also, while this may to some people look like a gross overreaction to harsh criticism, insults, I mean, like I said earlier, even death threats are sadly commonplace in the gaming industry for disgruntled customers. To shine a little bit of light of why they may have felt this to be necessary, we're just going to be talking about some different aspects. We might dive into some of the harsh reactions from the Japanese audience for things that might not have even been Capcom's fault. For example, Luty actually uncovered a whole drama where a very famous Japanese YouTuber actually had a CPU die out in the middle of playing Monster Hunter on a stream. And it's actually in this video. Luty, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this guy is M. Hashi. He's a streamer, if I recall correctly. Now, I hadn't heard of him before this whole thing. He seems to be popular enough that like I even, some people I know who are not Japanese have heard of him, so I don't really know much about him. But from what I understand, he was streaming Wilds, and while he was playing it, his entire PC died. Like, his CPU fried completely, and it's kind of a big part. I mean, granted, a lot of the complaints and a lot of things were happening before this. It didn't cause it, but I think it's really the thing that set people in Japan over the edge, where, you know, from their perspective, they're watching a dude play the game, and then suddenly the stream goes offline, and then the guy comes back. You know, I don't know if he posted on Twitter or what, but he comes back with news that his entire PC is dead, and then now you have people like I could count like I cannot count on two hands the amount of reviews I saw on Steam in Japanese that were mentioning, don't buy this game, it will destroy your computer. Like, now, granted, what ended up being the case is that, and kind of what he's talking about in this video here, is that he had messed with the BIOS of his PC himself without really knowing what he was doing. And there were flaws with the specific Intel CPU he got on Intel's side that are, that caused it. And so, well, Wilds, yes, is a very heavy CPU load, and it's not like Wilds is entirely off scot-free in this case, because, if it hadn't, supposedly he wasn't having issues before playing Wilds, and, I'm sure if he had been playing less CPU-intensive games, it wouldn't have caused it to fry. This game, this game does not destroy a CPU unless the CPU was gonna break no matter what. Like, it might have sped it up, but, he was boned from the beginning. And, yeah, so it was kind of a whole thing. He talks about how he was actually having trouble playing Wilds at all beforehand. It was crashing like crazy. And, the day he was streaming it just happened to be one of the days where he got it to run, and I think he was just so excited he finally got to run once that he immediately went to go stream it. And so playing the game with OBS running, with the game running on a streamer's rig, it was one that he got pre-built, if I remember correctly, from because I think he's sounded like he was kind of newer to PC gaming. And Japan in general, PC gaming is a much smaller. It's really starting to take off a bit, but it's still a much smaller part of the gaming sphere there, So, the fact that people are still buying Intel CPUs there instead of AMD ones might be a good example of that. But so it seems like it's, mostly on Intel's fault, but the damage is kind of already done. And even though a lot of people realize that it's not really all Capcom's fault for the way this game, or the way that his what happened to his computer, it's kind of too late. Once these things get out there, it's real hard to pull it back. I know Capcom posted, they made a big post very recently, I think on their Japanese Twitter, I think in response to this video, or to the situation, where they mention, there's been a myth in Japan that the anti-cheat, de novo, which, I'm sure really does impact the performance. I don't know the specific technical details. To be clear, I'm not a programmer, or I'm not an IT guy. I just know enough people to talk to about this kind of stuff to figure things out. But, they made a big post because there's been a big myth in Japan that the de novo anti-cheat checks every single frame for how your game runs, and Capcom had to come out and explicitly say that there's no truth to that. There's been so many rumors and myths and things being spread in Japan about all this that, and Capcom, especially Japanese corporate accounts, very rarely will come out and say that sort of thing directly.
Gotcha. So they're having to deal with a lot of actual rumors and made up things and myths.
Yeah. It's a melting pot of genuine criticism and things people made up and things people didn't make up but are completely misunderstanding because they don't really know how computers work, and people that are earnest and the M. Hashi does not seem like a bad guy at all. His posts about it are pretty genuine. I think he just kind of accidentally ended up being in the middle of a situation that he didn't want to be, you know?
Yeah. Didn't you say when you were reporting on this on Twitter, didn't you say that this video is actually kind of like an apology video as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, some people describe to me as an apology video. He's like, it's kind of like his way of being like, this is what actually happened. Don't spread rumors, you know?
Gotcha. Okay.
I mean, he's not really like, he's not defending Wilds, you know? Like he also mentioned that, you know, once he got all this sorted out and he got, in this video, he actually talks about, well, he was going to continue using the CPU because he got it to work again. But in the comments, all the comments were telling him, like, no, you need a new one. That one is just going to break again. And so apparently he brought it back to Intel and got a new one. And for whatever reason, he's not having any of the crashing issues that he used to have. So,
gotcha.
Yeah, so I think it's, you know, it's kind of fair to call it an apology video, but not really. It's more like a oops, because I think the video title is literally like, so this is the situation that just happened. It's like him, it's like a retrospective in a way, you know?
Yeah.
Like this is what happened when I was streaming. This is why it happened, just to set the record straight.
Now, actual myths and rumors like this, that Wilds has de novo that checks every single frame of the game and it's gonna fry your CPU if you play, don't buy this. That is legitimate grounds for some form of legal repercussions if it's spread maliciously, because it will affect sales, it will affect different things like that, especially if they manage to stigmatize Wilds. So it's funny because I didn't even think about it that way until we just had this conversation. When you really think about it, that really would affect sales beyond just some people saying this game's not very good.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like, it's a double-edged sword, you know, because I think it's probably a bad idea. It'd be a really bad look for Capcom to start doing that kind of thing, but from a purely legal perspective, I suppose, yes. But it's also a lot harder when it's like just kind of random people on the internet.
Yeah.
But there's also, you know, there's a fair amount of YouTubers in Japan who talk about this sort of thing. Like, just the other, like, literally today, someone I know sent me a Japanese YouTube video, like just the thumbnail and title. And so do you know anything about Mario Kart World? Like, and the recent update that game had that a lot of people hate?
I heard that a lot of people were saying it was like dead and it was dying and people are going back to Mario Kart 8 and stuff.
So people really liked Mario Kart World. You know, like when it first came out, a lot of people were really like skeptical about it, but you know, it took like a week and then everyone loved it. It was great. But you know, there's one feature that people really don't like, and now I don't need to get into the specifics, but basically there was a way to circumvent that feature by picking random on the course selection. Because you know, normally if you select a normal course, it would actually have you drive to that course as part of the race. And it would usually just be like a really straight line, really boring course layout. But if you selected random, it wouldn't make you do that. And then Nintendo updated the game so that now even if you select random, most of the time it'll force you to do the sort of like straight line, boring level design sections. And it's really like the only part of the game that people hate. Basically everyone dislikes it. And so, you know, even in Japan, it's a really disliked update. And so I don't know how true this is because I didn't actually watch the video, but the YouTube video I was sent in the thumbnail said that people are starting to call it, in Japan, are starting to call it Mario Kart Wilds, because like Wilds is such a cash cow right now in Japan for like gaming YouTubers to talk about as like, you know, like Capcom has done it again. Now obviously they don't have the term Capcom in Japan, but like, you know,
that algorithm hits no matter what country you're in.
Yeah, I posted about this too, but they invented a whole fucking slur to be able to, you know, talk about people who like Wilds. They call them hoizu, which is like the Japanese equivalent of the word for foil, like aluminum foil. And it's really close to how you would write Wilds in Japanese, which is wairuzu. So it's like hoizu and wairuzu. And it's basically to refer to people who defend the state of Monster Hunter Wilds, or who defend the game as like you have to be a conspiracy theorist to be able to defend the game, because it's supposedly so obvious to the Japanese Wilds haters that Wilds is supposedly a terrible game, that like if you defend it, this means that you're like a terrible person. Like I had this one Japanese person reply to one of my comments, talking about how, now I don't know how much they were exaggerating, but they were talking about how much you get bullied for defending Wilds in Japan right now, that they literally asked me to delete my replies to them so they could delete their reply to me, so they wouldn't get harassed for complaining about the people complaining about Wilds. And now at the same breath, like, you showed me a comment of someone claiming to be Japanese. Now, whether they're actually Japanese is up in the air, but who says that they're going to get, sued for even talking bad about Wilds. So it's like, there's just so much. This game has become the center of a culture war in a way that I don't think any Monster Hunter fan expected or really wants it to be. I think even a lot of the people who don't like Wilds that are big Monster Hunter fans, they want it to be better, right? They want it to improve as a game. But a lot of people don't really care about that. They see it as like this culture war center of like, the gamer versus the company, or, like there's so much to it that it's just like, it's kind of insane, it can't just be oh, I like this game. Oh, that's cool. I didn't really like it, but I'm glad you liked it. And then like we move on. It's got to be instead it's got to be like, you're a conspiracy theorist, or oh, I'm oppressed for not liking this game. It's a very
you're a
dramatic
glazer
scenario.
or doomer.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very dramatic situation, especially in Japan. I think especially in Japan because this series has been so well loved since the PSP era there, that it would be the same thing as if like, this is almost as if like a Zelda game came out and was like, had this like mixed reception.
It's like Japan's Call of Duty.
Yeah, exactly. except for I think Western gamers have accepted that Call of Duty will never be what it used to be. But that hasn't happened for Monster Hunter yet. And it's kind of almost like, for Japanese gamers, it almost seems like that's kind of how they're feeling about this.
This is Call of Duty Ghosts, basically.
Yeah, for them, kind of, yeah.
That's so funny. Well, yeah, it is nuts to think about, like, just how big all of this, like, we feel like it's big here, but it really is big over there too. Goodness gracious. Speaking of all of this harassment campaign / Capcom can't take criticism / now they're actively trying to censor the Japanese audience with the infamous Doc. We also have what was, announced to be a performance like summit almost. There was going to be a presentation, and now, due to like news outlets and everything, we know that they're actually going to cancel that presentation. A lot of people were linking it to developer harassment, and they linked it directly to the statements earlier, the infamous Doc, of course. However, you brought to my attention an interesting point that on the actual website, it has lecture canceled, but they don't actually give any reasoning for it.
Yeah, and like if you'll pull that article back up again for a second, you'll notice it says like they cancel it amid ongoing developer harassment. They don't actually say that it's because of that. I mean, I think it's not too far-fetched of a claim to link the two, but it's not that Capcom came out and said we were going to talk about this, but now we realize people are going to harass us over this. It's more like they've canceled it, and they also canceled it well around the same time all this other stuff is happening, and then they kind of leave you to fill the gaps and assume that, that must be why they canceled it.
Yeah, and a lot of people have kind of ran with that because they really did drop the cancellation and the Doc around the same time.
Yeah.
And maybe there is a link to it. After all, they are going to be at a specified location, for the actual performance itself. And one thing that, that we were talking about a little bit earlier, but we'll talk about it on recording. Hey y'all, for the sake of respect for this next topic at hand and for your own personal comfort, this is a warning that we will be going over some disturbing contents. There will be more than just harassment. There will also be things like death and acts of extreme violence. Please skip forward if you do not feel comfortable listening or seeing anything like this. I do not want to make anyone feel uncomfortable, so please skip forward to this time period if you don't want to view any of this. Thank you. There have been some things amongst like hot button Japanese topics that could lead to companies being a little bit more on edge, and the culture of Japan as a whole being on edge for certain things. And one of the most high profile things is the Kyoto anime fire. There was an arsonist attack that happened, unfortunately, in July 2019. And it was literally, if you pull up the article or look into it at all, a man walked into the studio where there was, I think I read it was over 70 artists were there. And he literally took gasoline to the place, set it on fire, and he repeatedly yelled for them to drop dead. And unfortunately, 36 people were killed and dozens more were injured. So it was...
That's insane. I'd never heard of this until you brought it up to me.
Yeah, it was very, very unfortunate. It happened in 2019, but it was brought back to the attention of the Japanese public and to whoever else heard about it in 2024 in January, where the perpetrator of this incident was actually given the death penalty.
What do we know what caused him to do that? Like, was it like what was he upset about?
In the article, it says that he claimed mental instability. However, the prosecutors blamed it on the delusion that KyoAni Studio had plagiarized his work and influenced his motivation. And so, it was just a disgruntled guy that walked in. I mean, it says that he had burns over 90% of his body. Even the perpetrator didn't come out unscathed. And, it was a very unfortunate incident in a country that doesn't see like huge incidents like this often.
Yeah. And when they do, I've noticed it tends to be that sort of like, otaku crowd, some of the more hikikomori, like, very heavy internet users, like what we would consider like the equivalent of like how many mass shooters in the United States, at least in recent years, end up being like, people who are in deep spots of the internet that like most people don't go, like 4chan and even things like 8chan and that type of thing. So it's when you see, and I think a lot of the harassment or whatever you may call it, criticism, harassment, insults about wilds in Japan are coming from that same kind of sphere. It's definitely something that I imagine devs are thinking about.
Yeah, because at that point, if you are truly worried that someone may actually follow through with actual homicide, that puts a whole different element of fear into dealing with the death threats. Whenever they feel more real beyond just some 12-year-old behind a laptop, just telling someone they're going to kill them over Twitter, it's very different. And like, as someone who lives in the United States, it could almost, some people might laugh at it, like the concept of, oh, they just can't take it or they're so scared. This happens to Western devs all the time. This happens to other devs all the time. But we live in a country where mass shootings and terroristic threats, like that.
It's like, that happens every Tuesday. Like,
yeah, it's unfortunate, but that's just a reality of where we live, and our culture is kind of desensitized to it a little bit. Whereas in this, and looking at this and seeing the Kyoto incident and seeing other things, it makes sense as to why the presentation would be canceled. And maybe there's not a direct linkage to this, exactly, but maybe there is, and why they only address the Japanese audience with this kind of notice as well, you know.
And I think that even if there's not a direct link, I think in the even in the best case scenario, Capcom probably realized it'd be a little tone deaf. Now it doesn't sound like they would have been making grand claims about this is why Wilds runs the best out of any game ever released on a PC, but I do think, as interested as I was in the talk, I was very curious what they were going to say, from a developer perspective. Because this was a talk, to be clear, this was a talk to developers about how they developed a thing in the video game. This was not really meant to be for the people who play the game. It was going to be for, if you're interested in developing games and how games are developed, these are some of the ways that Capcom worked to optimize Wilds on PC. Now, whether they were successful or not is a completely different story, but unfortunately, I think it would have been considered tone deaf. Yeah. So when you think of it from the perspective of, at best, they were probably going to get people groaning at them and like being like, fix the game first, then talk about this. And at worst, you have situations like the Kyoto animation attack. Like, I think it just made the most sense to cancel it,
Yeah.
As much as I'm a little disappointed by it because I was really curious what they were going to talk about, it's just, you got to do what you got to do.
Definitely. And so, all this to be said, there's a lot more nuance to things like this than a lot of people can originally give it credit for. And sometimes it's not so simple as they've been getting a little more hate than usual. Sometimes there might be things bubbling under the surface, maybe for the sake of, us Western audience. Sometimes there's things unseen, that we don't know or don't notice that's happening on the other, side of the world.
Yeah.
As far as rhetoric or even potential fear. And so, not to demonize, any audience whatsoever, but, to talk about how be a good person, a decent person at least. Don't go out of your way to harass developers and things that, or personally attack people. And even if this is 100% addressed specifically to the Japanese audience for specific reasons and nuanced reasons, this still could apply to us as well. And just be a decent person. And next time you might think about maybe they're hiding behind something, or maybe they're trying to like censor people. Sometimes it's a lot more complex than that. If you are on the side of, okay, they're just using this as an excuse to curb criticism. There are things under the surface that we are unaware of. Not shilling for the multi-million-dollar company. They have much more money than I ever will. But at the same time, I can like empathize with the idea of being fearful for your life. Like that's you should be able to do that too, ideally. So
I think speaking of things that are kind of lost in the cultural translation, something a lot of people don't know is that this is not really the first time that Capcom has had to deal with this. Back in 2006, when Monster Hunter DOS came out, which is Wilds is my second favorite Monster Hunter game, and DOS is my first favorite. So I only like the controversial ones for some reason.
Yeah.
But when Monster Hunter DOS came out, it was seen as so hostile to the player from the perspective of, like it had really difficult small monsters. There's like a bunch of them, and they have a lot of health. And so, like, you're fighting the large monster, and then you're also being surrounded by Vespoids and Bullfango and Velociprey and Congas. And other things, it had a season system just like Wilds, but the season system was a little more restrictive over like for example, during the warm season, you could not go to the desert at all because it's too hot. And during the cold season, you can go to the snowy mountains, things like this. And when one of the developers was asked about this in an interview, his response was, well, nature is harsh. And it was kind of meant to encapsulate what their design philosophy was, I think, for the game, which was it was supposed to be this more immersive experience and was supposed to make you feel like, being a monster hunter out here in the wilderness is a harsh experience, and you do have to adapt to these things. But we'll just say that it was not very well accepted of an explanation for why Monster Hunter DOS was the way that it was. And so that was Soyoshi Tanaka, who at the time was basically the equivalent of what like Ryozo Sugimoto is now. Back in that time, Ryozo was just like, he was the director of the online portion of the games, because they had an online mode and an offline mode separately. And so, he was in charge of like the servers and all that kind of stuff. And the player base for Monster Hunter DOS at that time, and now I don't know how widespread this was, because I've talked to some old Japanese gamers who were playing Monster Hunter DOS when it came out in 2006, and I've got varying answers over whether or not they were there when this was happening. But anytime the game was like harsh towards the player, people would post TNKSN into the chat, which is short for Tanaka Shine, which literally means Tanaka die.
Oh, wow.
They were so mad at him that it was commonplace for them to just commonly wish death upon him in their chat rooms. And it's the kind of thing that like he stopped, because so keep in mind that right before Monster Hunter DOS came out, he also was the director for Devil May Cry 2, which is a well-known failure of a video game. Now, I've never actually played it, so I don't have opinions on Devil May Cry 2, but you don't need to have played the game to know how people feel about it. So he instantly became branded as the sequel killer, which is funny because he worked on all the Monster Hunter games before that point. And he, people back then actually liked the first Monster Hunter and Monster Hunter G and Monster Hunter Portable, which were the 3 Monster Hunter games that were released before DOS. And, so they ignored all the stuff that he did on those games that they actually liked and just focused on the fact that he also worked on the one game they didn't. And I think we kind of see a lot of that with Wilds, too. A lot of people, at least in Japan, seem to really be lumping a lot of the blame for this onto Tokuda's shoulders in some ways. Now, some of them are lumping it onto Sugimoto. He's the producer, so he's likely the one that would have been responsible for things like the development timeline. But for the most part, I see a lot of people lumping it onto Tokuda. And, Tanaka has never worked on a Capcom game since Monster Hunter DOS. He does not work for Capcom anymore. And I don't know. I don't want to say, Tokuda's been playing, or been a developer for Monster Hunter since like 2005. So I'm sure he'll be okay. But, sometimes I worry about him because it has to be super stressful to suddenly have all these players, blaming you for the state of the game that you worked on for like 6 years. And ignoring the fact that they liked the last game you made, Monster Hunter World. Because that's definitely a common thread, is most people who complain about Wilds tend to compare it to World. And, supposedly want it to be more like World. Ignoring the fact that World had a lot of these same problems. And, World was made by the same people who made Wilds. And, I don't think they're stupid. I think they know enough of what they're doing that, at least for me, I feel like Wilds will end up in a good place. Now, does that excuse the fact that it released in a very shoddy state on PC? Not necessarily. But obviously none of that warrants, calls for death on developers or threats against their lives or things like of that nature.
Yeah, I agree. Well, to end, that was interesting though. That was interesting about the DOS parallels. That is a funny. I'm glad you mentioned that.
It's the type of thing that even a lot of Japanese gamers don't realize that this kind of thing has happened before and has real life consequences on real life people's employments, and people, even a lot of Japanese gamers won't know because, like I said, this happened in 2006. I'm 24 right now. I'm sure a lot of Monster Hunter fans in Japan are in their early 20s. I was 5 years old, when that all happened. Now, obviously, I was American, so it was not even less a part of my life than it would have been if I was 5 years old in Japan. But I'm sure most people that play Monster Hunter in Japan, would need to be told about those events happening by someone who was around back then. It's probably not common knowledge. Now, I don't actually know how common knowledge it is, but this is why I take such an interest in Monster Hunter history, because it's such an important part of, Monster Hunter is a very historical series in the sense that everything is iterative, everything is built on the past. The fact that every single Monster Hunter game still has all the weapons that were in the last Monster Hunter games is exclusively because of the player reaction to Monster Hunter Tri not having all the weapons that Monster Hunter DOS had. And when we don't look at the history of the series and you just look at things in isolation and compare them to things in Western gaming as if this wasn't a series that has 20 years of history, 21 years really, in Japan, then you miss a lot. A lot of Monster Hunter players pretend like Monster Hunter started with World, and here in the West, we literally have people calling it a Souls-like, even though it came out years before Souls. It's, what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that people miss out on by not knowing the history.
Indeed. Well, to end this kind of bleak video, I appreciate having you on, Luty. I'm glad you
Thanks for letting me out.
Spoke, man.
Giving me a platform for my propaganda.
Hey, yeah. Play DOS. Play with the Monster Hunter Old School crew. If you're interested in seeing me play DOS with the Monster Hunter Old School crew, comment that.
Yeah, that's the one thing you're allowed to harass is Meat Man to get him to play the PS2 games. That's the only one I'll endorse.
Oh man. Well, I appreciate you, Luty. Stay meaty, my friends, to the dogs.
Thank you. Everyone have a good night.
And to all of the awesome supporters of the channel, thank you so much. And a special thanks to Acre, Funaloss, and Monster Hunter. Can't do this without y'all.
I've got dinner ready. Let him cook.